Welcome back. Today we are going to talk about the SoundPEATS Opera05. As I mentioned in my last SoundPEATS video, I did want to touch on the Opera05 because it is a special set. It is sort of the top of their audiophile line, and it is fully loaded and a bit special. And that special really starts with the back of the case. There you go. It has a couple nice inscriptions like this. It says, "Hear your imagination." Case itself, it is a little bit chunky, like the shell itself. It's just a little bit bigger than what you're expecting in a TWS. There is the, hold down the button to reset the pairing, which is actually super handy. Inside, this color theme of black and goldish sort of runs through the shells, runs through the case. It's actually quite nice. And as I said, when we look at each one of the shells, they actually do have a little inscription on this one too, and I think that one says designed by SoundPEATS. So a little hard to see on here. It's a bit of a fingerprint magnet as well, but there you go. So there's microphone, microphone. The nozzle itself is oval, and you get a really nice looking SoundPEATS logo touch area on there. But when you look at it, the fit is actually something that you sort of have to consider because it goes for a little deeper insertion. This is a shallow tip meant to be pushed in quite a bit, and then you twist it to kind of lock it in your ear. So a little bit different than their hang down style, and even a little different than their Mini HS Pro, which was a little smaller looking, more traditional looking shell. This one definitely has a bigger battery, 2 BAs, and a big dynamic driver. So I guess it needed a little space, but yeah, it's a slightly bigger shell than what you may be expecting, so do take that into consideration. The box is actually pretty similar to boxes they've used before. It's just a little more shiny with this rainbow reflective effect. So let's look at the graph kind of right away. So Mini Pro HS, like I said, I point to that one because it's very similar to the Opera05. It's just in a smaller shell and there's no balanced armatures, but it does have LDAC and it does have ANC and transparency. So kind of similar in functionality, but missing some of the audiophile features. But sound-wise, SoundPEATS tends to use the SoundPEATS classic EQ setting. So whatever set you pick up that's supported by that EQ, they all tend to be roughly similar. For Opera05 in the red, you can kind of see the bass actually bumps up, and it's a 12 millimeter dynamic driver, and you hear all of that. That's not a, wave your hands over that bass shelf and say, it doesn't sound as bassy as that. No, it sounds just as bassy as it looks. The mids really flatten out. You end up with these clean, clear mids, which is sort of a hallmark of this tuning. This drop-off point basically carries, very little into the mids, but they still sound warm, but you don't get that bleed, that distortion. The mids actually stay clean and clear, and I think that, for me, that's sort of a hallmark of this classic EQ setting. As I said, as you get into the treble, this one actually takes kind of an easier ride through the lower treble and then bumps up in the upper treble, whereas HS Pro is sort of the opposite. You get kind of a lower treble bump, and then it really relaxes the upper treble. And what this really does for me, that airiness, that stage size, I can't really complain about what they did. I think their strategic use of peaks and valleys to control fatigue and emphasize parts that they want to in the signature, I think is another hallmark of what SoundPEATS has been doing with that EQ. And I actually find it kind of fascinating. As a hobbyist, it's fascinating to see how they constructed this curve and how they keep on reusing it and changing it as they go along. So that is the graph. So let's kind of jump into it. And as I said, Opera05, this is the top of the line. There's an Opera03, which I think only has one balanced armature. But this one is the specs beast. Big 12 millimeter dynamic driver. Not all that common to find 12 millimeter dynamic drivers, especially in TWS. In wired IEMs, it's becoming more popular, but it is very unique to hear, and I actually enjoy it very much, and we'll talk about it a little bit later. 2 balanced armatures are actually sitting pretty close to the nozzle. They're kind of in this area. So if you're used to wired IEMs and you're used to having balanced armatures towards the nozzle, you sort of know that they take on a little bit of an edginess. We'll call it BA timbre, but that's exactly what you get out of this. So big bass sound, and then there's this edginess to the balanced armatures because of where they're sitting. So kind of unique. It's kind of a sound that I'm used to. I don't know if TWS people are necessarily used to it, but I'm very much used to it. So next spec, LDAC. So very high-res wireless audio, about as high-res as you're going to get. SBC, which is the baseline codec that everyone needs to implement. And this one also does AAC. So for you Mac guys or iOS guys, you guys don't have access to LDAC, but you do get AAC. And I think that is actually something that is different from HS Pro and the other one. And I'm not sure that was just a typo and it was left off, but I actually went through and made sure that was actually not a typo and that AAC is actually implemented, and it actually is. So on Android, you can actually cycle through LDAC at different bit rates. So you get 3 different bit rates. I think 400 is about the default. This one goes up to about 990 for the highest LDAC bit rate. And you can actually turn that off, and it'll actually default back to AAC because that's the next highest codec. So all that was working well for me. This one also does ANC and transparency mode. So fully loaded functionality, high-end drivers, battery life. You get about 6 hours on LDAC. 6 hours on LDAC, 4.7 hours if you turn on ANC, and the case will recharge these guys about 2.7 times. So SoundBeast, as I said, the SoundPEATS app, you get this full app integration, and you almost get this unified sound signature across their supported headsets, which is what I was talking to about. This, you sort of get flavors. Each headset has a different flavor of about the same signature, but they are bassy, energetic, very clean. Those are sort of the characteristics that really cross their headsets. And on this one, it's just slightly tweaked as well. So Opera05 is really no different. SoundPEATS Classic EQ is the default, and there's other presets, and you get a custom 10-band EQ as well if you use the app. The strengths on this guy, definitely the 2 BAs. It's something very unique. Not the only one in the world, but there aren't that many TWSs that have 2 balanced armatures, and it really adds an edge, as they should. As I said, their placement, simply being balanced armatures, you do get a little bit of edginess to your sound, but that 12mm dynamic driver is really the powerhouse here. It is a big, bold dynamic driver, and they tuned it, not to hide it. It's kind of in all of its glory there. So as in other LDAC sets, it handles the maximum bit rate like a champ. As I said, it'll do up to 990 if your phone supports it. ANC and transparency modes are the cherry on top. So the fully loaded audiophile experience is sort of what they were going for with Opera05. The weaknesses, like I said, the shell is a tad on the big side. It's something that you have to kind of make sure it fits in your ear, make sure you lock it in place. It does require a more secure fit, so do that twist and lock. And that bass level is sort of absurdly fun, but for audiophiles, I'm not sure. It's probably a bit much for most audiophiles, but most definitely tons of fun. And one suggestion I would give to SoundPEATS is exactly on that topic. For anything that has audiophile in that audiophile product range, really do a special EQ setting that is more natural. The drivers are super capable, but really give the audiophiles a more neutral signature to enjoy. I mean, not everyone, but I enjoy a big V. This is sort of a big, energetic sound. That's all fine, but, just making this a little more neutral, bringing this down, I think they can do something very, very nice that would actually go right along with that audiophile label that they've been using. So sound-wise, SoundPEATS Classic is very bassy, very energetic, kind of that clean W shape as I was talking about. 2 BAs in the nozzle. This one really takes on a sharper edge over that massive bass, which is actually kind of unique for me. Their normal SoundPEATS TWS actually does something very, very similar, but this one's just a little more pronounced because you have 2 BAs sitting there in the nozzle. So it's just a little more emphasized. It sounds a bit more etched to it. Edginess, sharpness, I think everything comes through. It's a little more clear. That clarity is just bumped up a little bit just because you've got 2 BAs there. I think they use them pretty well. Bass, huge fun level of bass, like I said. But as I mentioned before, the 12mm dynamic driver can handle it. It's actually unique, and I mentioned this on a couple SoundPEATS sets already. I don't know where they got their 12mm driver from, but it's one of the few that can really handle a lot of bass without a lot of distortion. It's quite unique to hear, and almost justifies the price alone to hear, to have a set that's a 12mm dynamic driver. In the wired world, there's not that many of them, and people pay quite a bit of money. So to get this one, at a special price with a 12mm is a bit special. Mid bass heavy, as you saw on the graph, so it's really hard. It really hits hard on a new track like Skrillex's Way Back, but it rolls down the sub bass to maintain control and lesser rumble. So, this hits super hard, and then it actually rolls off, so you don't get a whole lot of distortion, a whole lot of anything that's going to affect the clarity here, and that's sort of, I think, the way it all works. But even on a quieter track, like there's a new track by Lana Del Rey, whose name I already forgot. But that new track, it really catches you by surprise how much sub bass is there and how it kind of rises up and kind of shakes your ear a little bit. But mostly, right at home on Skrillex's Way Back, that genre, that type of music, very much right in line with that bass level. So the amount of bass is good, but for some genres, not so much for others. That just need a little bit, like as I said, they just need a new EQ setting that's a little bass, more bass balanced. Mids, with SoundPEATS Classic EQ, that bass drops down to 200, like I said. It keeps the bleed down, but it gives you a warm tone, and the BAs layered on top for contrast and separation. Everything kind of works as you would expect it to work. It's just a very energetic signature, so it's sort of more of a W sound. Maybe not the most natural, but that clarity not only works well in music, but it works on movies and games and podcasts, where you want those mids to be a bit more forward and a bit more brighter, so you don't have to really play with the volume. If you're watching a movie and dialogue seems a bit more recessed, that doesn't really happen, or it happens less on a W-shaped signature like this one. Treble, like the bass, that EQ is used to keep that lower forward, dip down to control those fatiguing parts. Like I said, it's actually kind of unique the way they use peaks and valleys in their EQ, and it really adds air and stage height in that upper treble, as I said. So something like AC/DC, you can pretty much turn on any AC/DC track, and it just hits the right spots. Drums, guitars, big drum sound because of the bass. The guitars have a lot of energy, but not fatiguing energy. It's not kind of blasting your ears. As I said, it's actually kind of unique the way they control those peaks and those valleys, and it actually falls right in place with the tracks from AC/DC. And then you get a slight bump on the vocals to make sure even the male vocals are a little bit more forward. It's, again, I will say it, not super natural, but it actually works out quite well. Like the 12mm, how the EQ manipulates the treble levels is unique, as I said. Perhaps not the most natural, but some BA timbre and thinness, but a very super fun signature, as I said too many times already. Stage, another SoundPEATS that does it right for TWS. More than enough projection in height and width. It extends beyond your ears in kind of both of those directions. And it really gives you a sense of clarity and imaging. I think those two really come across because of the stage size. The depth is affected by those upper mids. So they brought everything forward a little bit, but that really brings everything forward. So you don't get as much depth because everything is forward. So on one hand, vocal sound as you would expect, not recessed at all, but it affects, sort of that stage presence of where they are, and they're just a little more close in and more intimate than could be, but easy trade-off to make because 90% of the people really care about vocals sounding clean and clear, and that's exactly what they do. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.